All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. It's a great day, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm not sure if the screen is very clear, so I'm just going to take a moment to switch on and light up my space. Let's see if it's much better. Hopefully, be able to get better light. All right, all right, all right. It's a great day, guys, and testing, testing, and testing. My name is Joshua Awesome. Um, I am excited to be able to come to you this week, focusing on a true story that actually happened um, in a place where I believe something very special happened for me and happened with me. So I'm just going to go ahead and just take it away. Yeah. All right. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am humbled, I am grateful, I am excited um, to be able to bring you this week's Mind Your Mind. And I'm really hoping that somebody who gets to see this um, gets to hopefully share it and hopefully get to, um, tell the story to their own community. Right. It's a great day. My name is Joshua Awesome. Wherever it is you're joining me from, if you are joining me from Africa, um, greetings to you. If you're joining me from Europe, greetings to you. If you're joining me um, from America, greetings to you. My name is Joshua Awesome. So, this week, um, 2019, I was actually in Switzerland. And I was in Switzerland for three reasons. One, I was in Switzerland to deepen my research work. Um, and two, I was in Switzerland to climb Mont Blanc. And three, I was in Switzerland towards deepening my work um, and wanting to also see how I could business focus and get a division of my business called Dr. Awesome Holdings registered. And here's an interesting story why I am sharing this story. Um, when I initially wanted to make that trip, one of the things that was at the back of my mind was um, to see how I could, as an African, first and foremost, learn how I could invest in pushing myself forward through drawing attention to stress and mental health. And so, how does Switzerland, stress, mental health, how do they connect? Well, they all connect with one important thing. They all connect with the fact that Switzerland is the Mecca of mental health. Sorry, Switzerland is the Mecca of health. So when you think of health, you're thinking Switzerland. And why is that important? It's important because a lot of times, many persons want to achieve certain goals. And while they are thinking of those goals, they are possibly also thinking, how best can I achieve it? And this is why I'm focusing on my experience out in Switzerland and using that as a case. Today's edition and this week's edition on the gospel according to stress. So, the last two Sundays, I have taken time to um, double click on what I call the gospel according to stress. And typically, when I think about it, one of the things that comes to my mind is the fact that many times as human beings, when we set out to achieve a goal, we typically have that goal at the back of our mind. We're not thinking of the challenges, the baggages, the stress, and the situations that sometimes comes through challenging us on that journey. And the truth is, when I set out to try to head out to Switzerland, I just wanted to achieve what I set my mind to achieve. The first, like I indicated, was to further deepen my work in stress reduction and mental health. Secondly, was to climb Mont Blanc. And of course, lastly, was to also get registered as a mental health brand. Um, and the truth is, they were all risks that I took. And every time we wake up, one of the things that we should realize is that something great can emerge through you, through me, through all of us. However, we need to just open our minds and our hearts to one reality, that we approach the day with new eyes. So here's the first piece of my story. Um, this exact week, 2019, I finally got a visa to travel to Switzerland. Prior to this, I had received pretty much maybe 3 to 5 rejections. Um, and I recall when I initially applied for those visas to go out to Switzerland, honestly speaking, I had a passport and I had a green passport. Uh, um, the green passport I have is quite an interesting African country where many people who possibly know me um, would know what I'm talking about. And it's a very populous country in Africa. You already know what I'm talking about. For those who do not know, ask around or Google the most populous African country on the continent of Africa. So that's an assignment for anybody who's going to watch this or is watching this right now. And so I had presented that passport first and foremost. And the reason why I'm telling the story is because sometimes when we are about to achieve a goal or where we set out to achieve a goal, one of the things that we should learn to realize is that sometimes some things are not working because of the approach that we are taking. Okay. And so I had used my singular passport to try to apply for a Schengen visa, and I was rejected about 3 to 5 times, if I recollect. But that's not as important as the fact that eventually, when I got issued the Schengen visa to travel for the trip that I set out to travel for, something very, very important was possibly one of the reasons why I eventually got the visa. And I sat back and I reflected on my approach. While reflecting on my approach, it dawned on me that one of the reasons why I possibly experienced the rejections that I rejected was because I was only sharing with them what was the obvious. Now, the obvious, of course, for me was I was born in the most populous African country. What was not obvious was that I had transitioned from just being born in the most populous African country to moving to another African country, which is my country of residence. And I had lived in that country, in Africa, for over a decade, and of course, had become a permanent resident. So I got my permanent citizenship and residency in that African country. And then I added that document to support my new status. In adding that document, it pretty much aided me in getting um, the Schengen visa that I eventually got for that trip, coupled up with the fact that my host out in Western Europe um, also does some consulting work in Europe, and so also had secured a hotel for me and a couple of other persons that we were going to go for that trip together. Long and short, these were the things that aided my successful receipt of the Schengen visa. Now, why am I telling you this story? The reason why I'm telling you the story is that sometimes the things that are sounding, feeling, looking like mountains in our lives, that are feeling like stressful situations, simply need a different approach. All right. If you view a situation from a particular perspective, all right, and you notice that your view of that situation is not shifting or creating the opportunity for you to be able to access the results, the dream, the goals that you desire, then change the approach. And that is one of the things that I'd like to share as my very first lesson. Okay, so having said that, the other important thing for me, I would never forget, upon arrival in Switzerland, okay, um, it dawned on me for the very first time that once you are in Western Europe, okay, you can travel to any European country once you have the Schengen visa. Now, it was my first trip ever to Switzerland. Okay, even though I was going there as a researcher, I was going there to also climb Mont Blanc, and then I was also going to see how I could eventually register my Western European company. Now, all of these stories are not as important as the fact that many times what you do not know can actually be a limitation and a restriction towards the possibilities that could emerge for you. Now, I remember clearly when I arrived in Switzerland for the very first time, the one thing that I had no clue about was that when I was going to move from Switzerland to go to France, my thought was that I was going to need to possibly get stamped to be able to go into France, only for me to find out that there was nothing like that. Now, here's the thing, many times our preconceived motive or notion or perspective about a place, about a possibility, about a position, sometimes restricts what we experience and the things that we are able to feel, touch in that space and place. Now, why am I sharing this? I think there's somebody out there who might watch this that might need to come to terms with one reality, that your limitations are actually between your ears. I'm going to repeat that. The limitations you face are actually in between your ears, which leads me to one important scripture. Okay. And it's the scripture about Abraham and Lot. Now, when Abraham was told to go to a new land, he was the one that was called to go. He was the one that got the instructions. He was the one that got the intuition. He was the one that got the inspiration. However, he did not go alone. He went with Lot. Now, the scripture tells us that when he took that journey with Lot, he experienced a lot of lots, literally. A lot was kind of burdening him. He experienced restrictions, he experienced limitations, he experienced challenges, and his life was kind of a lot. Okay? So going with Lot became a burden for Abraham. Now, here is the interesting lesson. Sometimes the journey that we want to take, the journey we're embarking on, the journey we're on, sometimes simply needs our presence, not other people's presence. Okay. It needs singular, our own presence. Okay. Your presence is the present that your purpose needs. All right. And when you are present on that pathway, purpose becomes possible, right? Any person, any place, any people, okay, they could become lots, they could become burdens, they could become limitations. And that is the one scripture that comes to mind in this weekend's edition of the Gospel According to Stress. Here is the one thing that I want you to take from that very important lesson. When Abraham eventually let go of Lot, in other words, when he released the burden, when he gave up the baggage, when his lot changed, okay, when he no longer needed to feel that Lot was necessary, the lot, the luggage, the baggage, the excess, the weight that weighed him down in form of a person no longer became a burden when he unburdened it. Now, so metaphorically, me choosing to relook at my situation, my planned journey to Switzerland, my purposed trip, okay? And it was a purposeful trip because on that very trip, I realized that what has now become a breakthrough solution for us at Dr. Awesome Holdings, which eventually is something that we would hopefully sooner than later bring to the world a solution, a therapy solution that was, that experienced clinical breakthrough, approved by the EU Research Council during the pandemic. And it's something that we're humbled and grateful for in partnership with some bio researchers in Western Europe. Humbled me. And it continues to humble me because of the possibilities that just daring to go forward, daring to take a risk, daring to recognize that the limitations that are limiting us are only in between our ears and in between our minds. And that is why I believe that when we mind our minds, we will be able to achieve more and stress less. So, moving forward with that interesting story, one thing I would never ever forget was that after arriving in Switzerland and then moving on to France to prepare to climb Mont Blanc, I realized suddenly that the limitations that look like limitations were not limitations, which is a very important lesson I can also draw from the Abraham and Lot story. Okay. The interesting thing was that when Abraham began to move forward, when he continued on the journey, when he moved, literally, movement is medicine, when he did not allow the lot in his life, which is a person in this case. For some people, it might be a career. For some people, it might be an environment. Okay. For some people, it might be a condition, which could be happening first and foremost in your mind. For some people, it might be some laws that you think in your mind are going to restrict you. And for me, until I made that move and I arrived in Switzerland this week, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I did not know how powerful the possibilities were. I did not know how limitless the possibilities are. And I share this because I want someone who is going to watch this, somebody who is watching this, to recognize that the lot in your life is first and foremost in your mind. When the lot in your mind is minded, you will stress less and achieve more. And when you stress less, achieving more becomes possible. And when you achieve more, you stress less, you mind your mind, and you're able to flourish and flower and find the way towards going to that place you dream of, that space you desire, that opportunity that desires you as much as you desire it. So, the next important thing that I'd like to share with you from that journey of mine was that first and next was that I would never forget. Hey, I see my friend Mateo there. Mateo, my friend from Spain. And I would never forget one interesting thing. That trip taught me one other key lesson. Okay. People enable people to succeed. Now, I remember clearly when I got to Passy in France, and I arrived at my hotel. My host, because he is used to the environment, because he um, has knowledge and he's done a lot of research work in that space. And as an environmentalist and a geographer, he understood the environment which he operated in. And so he announced to us and said, look, guys, the truth is, I can tell you one thing: the weather is not going to permit us to go hiking, because one of the reasons, like I initially said, was that I had gone there to try to climb Mont Blanc. And I'd never forget. When he announced that, the thought behind my mind was, okay, I don't have control over this. I will accept it. Which is the next lesson that I'd like to share with anybody who is watching this. Sometimes some things show up that bring you into a situation that is beyond your control. I will repeat that. Sometimes some things show up, bringing you into a situation that is beyond your control. And when you find yourself in a sometimes situation, all right, and it's beyond your control, accept that the way it showed up sometime is just a matter of some time it will expire. All right. The space and the place that you are right now is a space and a place this season. And this season is not all seasons. This season is what is now. This season is not what was. This season is not what will be. In other words, life is a continuum of new seasons. All right. Right now, it is springtime in South Africa. All right. I don't know what the season is wherever you are chiming in from. Whatever season it is, this season, wherever you are, is not the same season where I am. All right. And so we need to understand that life will bring us into spaces and places based on the situation, the space that we are currently in. And most times that space is one that we can manage within our minds. Okay. Our minds, our brains cannot tell the difference between yesterday and tomorrow. All right. So, what we need to learn to do is we need to mind our minds. When we mind our minds, we can achieve more and stress less. And that's the title of my next book, by the way, for the benefit of those who are chiming in. And one of the interesting things that I am grateful for is that I have learned in the course of my journey to accept something that I don't have control over. So I accepted the fact that, okay, this is my first trip. I would allow my host to guide me in every sense of the way. And the same way I allowed my host to guide me during that trip to France and Switzerland, it's the same way I encourage everyone who is watching this or who will watch this to allow the people, the place that you find yourself in to guide you in how you respond. All right? Take note of what I said. I did not say how you react, I said how you respond. Because your response is yours, my response is mine. And I encourage you to think about what I'm saying right now. Life will bring you into spaces and places that you do not have control over. When you find yourself in that space, in that place, in the season, whatever season you are in, recognize that you don't have control over the external. What you have control over is your response. And so, because of that, I allowed my guide to just lead the way. And in leading the way, it meant that we could not begin climbing Mont Blanc immediately. We simply needed to spend 48 hours getting to know each other some more. And I recall getting to go out to a restaurant in Passy, France. And I would never forget, the French are known for their cheese and their platters of cheese. And I'd never forget that experience at restaurant. And at the restaurant beside my hotel, we were served a platter of cheese. And it got me thinking about one important lesson. The environment you find yourself in is designed with all the nourishment to nurture you to the next season. Now, pause with me and think about that for a moment. During the pandemic, many people died. But regardless of the amount of persons that passed on the planet, not $1, not £1, not €1, not one hand, not one naira left the planet. In other words, the resource that we need simply needs to be sourced. And it needs to be sourced in the environment that we find ourselves in. As an African researcher, as a coaching psychologist, as an author, as a mental health professional, I have come to realize that there's enough to nurture us and nourish us in the environment that we find ourselves in. And that was one interesting lesson that I picked from, that place and space that I found myself in Passy, France. Now, it wasn't something that I was used to. I wasn't used to, sitting to have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and I'm served, a platter of cheese. That had never happened before I arrived in France. Doesn't mean I'd never had cheese before. However, I had never had it the way I had it. In other words, opening ourselves up to whatever it is that is about to emerge simply means noticing what lessons life is bringing to us in the space and place that we find ourselves. And that for me is a very, very, very important lesson that I took away from that trip in France. Which leads me to one of the last two lessons that I'm going to share. I recall 2 days afterwards, we set out and we got on the train, the tram, sorry, that took us towards the mountain range. And when we got there, we were told that that was actually the last train that was heading towards Mont Blanc for that particular week. Now, and I asked my mountain guide, help me understand what they are saying. And he explained, he said, because of the change in weather, no more train was going to go upwards until the weather had shifted. In other words, as human beings, sometimes when we notice that things are not aligning as we want, we should not resist. Because whatever we keep resisting persists. I would repeat that. Whatever we resist persists. And I like the fact that I allowed myself to be guided by my mountain guide in Passy, France, while I was planning to climb Mont Blanc, because it also helped me appreciate what eventually happened that I'm going to close this conversation with. So we got on that trip and it pushed us to a certain level, and we got off the tram, and we were told that it was not going to go beyond that point because it was the last one and had to descend quickly because of the weather that they had become used to. Here's the interesting thing. What it meant was those of us who were going further to climb Mont Blanc needed to recognize that because of the change in weather, because of the change in season, certain things that had become a norm in past seasons were going to be disrupted in the new season, which is a very vital lesson that I'm going to share based on what I'm about to say. And as we continue to hike up Mont Blanc, day 4, when we got to the last camp, we suddenly saw an avalanche crashing. And that avalanche brought us to a realization of what the season had announced to us a couple of days back. That because the season had changed and we did not have control over certain desires of ours that we wanted, which was to summit Mont Blanc, it became very clear that the avalanche was announcing to us, I am announcing that the seasons have changed, therefore you have to change direction. Here's the lesson I would like you to take away from that. At that point, my mountain guide announced to me and everyone who was in that camp, ladies and gentlemen, we had thought that we were going to plan to do a summit push tomorrow and start heading to the summit of Mont Blanc. Unfortunately, because of the situation that happened on Mont Blanc, and I see another friend of mine, the good coach, I call him the good coach. Good news, my dear friend chiming in from Southern Africa. Thank you so much, Good News, for chiming in. And I remember at that particular point, when I got to that point on Mont Blanc, sadly, and I say sadly, because we could not go further to climb, to head for the summit push on Mont Blanc. We had to descend. What we then found out was that people who had gone ahead of us were actually trapped at Mont Blanc. So they could not descend and they had to wait there for the evacuation team. Here's the important lesson that I'd like you to take away from what I have just shared. For the benefit of those who are just joining me, I'm sharing a life lesson that I learned from trying to attempt to summit Mont Blanc this week, 2019. And I remember clearly from the very get-go when arriving in France, having arrived in Switzerland, and then moved to France to go get ready for that climb, the one thing that was very clear was that upon arrival, my mountain guide could tell that the weather had changed. And because the weather had changed, the initial day we were supposed to begin our mountain climbing was not the day we began. Because he lives in the environment, because he had guided a lot of people up Mont Blanc, because he's an environmentalist and a geologist, he knows what the weather looks like in Western Europe. And because of his expertise and exposure to the environment over time, he knew that the weather was not right for us to set out. Here is the vital lesson. We resisted accepting what he had shared with us. And as we continued to resist it, the situation persisted, which is a very important lesson. What we resist persists. And here's my cue here and my very important lesson from that. There's a lot to learn as a person. All right. The more present you are, the more clarity things get. The more you become blessed by the beauty and bounty that is flourishing from you being present. And that's the one thing that I believe was one of the key blessings during that attempt to summit Mont Blanc. I am here sharing the story 3 years afterwards. The truth is, when we were descending Mont Blanc, we saw pieces of leather inside the ice. And I asked my mountain guide, what is this? He said, what does it look like? I said, it looks like